I know how you feel writing about secularisation. It's a big topic, there's loads of theories, so in this video I'm going to explain the main criticisms of secularisation thesis. I'm going to break them down into simple chunks. I'm going to go through all the concepts you can see on the screen now, and I'm going to go through the evaluations of those concepts. For more information, check out my channel and website. So secularisation thesis, remember, argues that the UK is in a permanent decline in religious participation. Religion has lost significance and that this is inevitable, it's going to keep going down. A number of sociologists disagree with this. They argue that society is simply changing, and that's changing the ways in which people practice their religions. So some of the key changes are the rise of individualism. People don't want to be told what to do by an authority above them. They want to find their own way. That is an increase in choice. People have much more choice in every aspect of their life, and it's the same in religions. There's greater choice, and also we're more characterised by consumerism. So consumerism refers to people buying stuff for pleasure, identifying themselves through what they buy and buying increasing amounts of things. In this context, we're talking about consumerism as in people picking and choosing which religious ideas they want to have a little go at, and then perhaps moving on to some different ones, that they're not stuck with a particular one they were born into, for example. So one of the key theorists here is Davie. Davie has a number of concepts she uses to try and explain the ways in which religion has just changed, the way we practice has changed, and that actually secularisation thesis is inaccurate. So the key change is that Davie argues we've moved from a situation where religion was about obligation. You were expected to be at church every Sunday, and if you weren't, the priest might say something to you, or you would feel the social pressure to be there, and that's what we might characterise as obligation. You were obliged to go along every week and follow some strict rules, really, and strict expectations about what being a Christian, for example, meant. Davie's arguing religion has changed. It's no longer about obligation. It's now defined by consumption. So people can go along to church when they want, but they don't have to. It's about an individual experience. So being a Christian no longer means following all of those rules that were set out. It's about picking your own path. And the term she uses for this is believing without belonging. She's saying people do still believe, like the evidence is there that people in survey data, when they ask people what faith they are, a significant number of people come back and say Christian. Even though they're not going to church every week, she argues that still represents the fact that we are not the UK is not becoming secular. It's not becoming less religious. So for Davie, what's happened is simply people are believing without belonging. They don't belong to the institution in a way that they used to. They don't feel obliged to go, but they do still have, underneath all that, a very strong religious belief. So secularisation from her perspective is false. So another concept Davie introduced is vicarious religion. If you're living vicariously, it means you're living through someone. So vicarious means to live through someone else's experience. What she's saying here is that people no longer go to church on a regular basis, but they allow the priests and the various people who organise churches, they almost act on their behalf, and when needed people will go to church, but the rest of the time they're happy to let priests sort of act on their behalf, and then they can drop into the religious ceremonies as and when they need to. And Davie characterises this as a bit like a spiritual NHS. Clearly you only go to the NHS when you're ill. She's saying it's the same with religion. We only go when we need it. So births, deaths, tragic events, those sorts of things. But otherwise, we're happy to let the professional religious leaders run the system on our behalf until we need to attend. So what are the evaluations of Davie's ideas? Davie's been strongly criticised by Voas and Crockett, and they argue people are neither believing nor belonging. They're not going to church in high numbers, and they also don't believe. They've used survey data to investigate this, and they found that people don't believe in God. Bruce also argues that in reality, if people aren't going to church, they're not very religious. It's an indication of secularisation. That's a key aspect of being religious, and we can't redefine it and argue that that isn't an example of secularisation. And finally, Day, and I think this is a really good criticism, when she interviewed people about their Christian faith, what she found was it was mainly about being British. It was mainly about having an identity which related to the UK. Very few people said, oh, I'm Christian because I strongly believe in God, or I think about God on a regular basis. Most people responded in a way that being Christian was part of their identity that they had inherited, and it was about being, white British. It wasn't about having a particularly strong spiritual or religious belief. Another theorist who argues individualism, consumerism and choice have changed our religious habits is this theorist. I'm not sure how you say their name. And they argue that we have become spiritual shoppers. What they mean by this is that we now have the freedom to pick and choose which religion that we're going to go to, and it's a very individualised process that we don't necessarily follow the religion of our parents, and in fact we're not likely to, according to this theory. We're now free, as I said, to pick and choose which religion we want to engage in, much like we're free to go shopping for whatever goods we like, changing brands, etc. Now, the reason they believe this is they argue most people are experiencing something called cultural amnesia. Now, amnesia, of course, is where you forget things. And what they're saying is children, when they're brought up, are no longer taught the cultural and religious ideas of their parents. They're less likely to be religious as children. So we're not being sort of collectively socialised into religion in society, and therefore traditional religions are declining. What's also problematic is in today's society, the church can't be too authoritarian. They can't tell people they must attend because people just reject it. It goes against our sort of sense of individualism and choice. So what you see is a decline in traditional religious worship, and he argues what's replaced this is this concept of the spiritual shopper, the person who can pick and choose which religion they want to move into, to investigate and potentially move on at any point. But they identify two different ways in which this happens. Now, firstly, you could be a pilgrim. Now, a pilgrim refers to someone who's really going on a very individualised path. They're probably involved in New Age religions, online spirituality, and they're really finding their own way. In contrast, a convert is someone who looks to join perhaps a traditional religion, an already established religion, and they're doing this because they want to reclaim that sense of community, that sense of identity which can still be gained from religion. But overall, they argue that we've become much more individualised, that we are these spiritual shoppers where people can move between different religious practices. If I was evaluating this or writing about it, I'd say the evidence isn't as strong for this because there isn't a huge number of people engaging in these alternative forms of religion, and traditional religions, the majority of them, are in decline. The most common answer, if you ask people under the age of 40, are you religious? They will say no, they have no religion. There may be some people who are spiritual shoppers, but it's not in high numbers, and it doesn't seem to be enough to reverse the trend of secularisation. Thanks for listening.